welcome to the very first episode of Chatterbox with me, Mel Biggs. I am here today with Luca Thébaut, kicking off my guest tutor series, which is going to be taking shape across all of 2024, with one guest tutor every month on my Patreon, with a podcast interview to go alongside. I have Luca Thébaut with me. He is from France. I am so honoured to be interviewing him on today's episode. Last November he hosted a Melodeon for me on my Patreon. You can go and check that out via the links in the description. Today is all about getting to know him on a deeper level, his influences, his musical tastes, his direction, his passions, his general ethos behind the way he teaches. So without further ado, let me introduce Luca Thébaut. I cannot believe that I am here with Luca Thébaut. I have been banging on about him for months over on my social media channels and my YouTube. He graciously agreed to come and lead a Melodeon on my Patreon last night. And now he's here for a podcast, my very first one. I'm really looking forward to getting to know him a little bit better and introducing him to my little patch of the internet, basically, and the online world of Melodeon tuition. So welcome, Luca. How are you?
I'm good.
I'm really interested to know, and some people on my Patreon have asked as well, that this series, they really want to know the people behind the music, where they came from, how they got into the Melodeon, but the kind of history of them in music. So what was your introduction to music as a player, as a listener? Kind of what's your background with that?
Well, the first introduction was actually quite natural and very early because my dad is a musician. So being born, I started growing up in the house like full of music. So my dad, he plays guitar, violin, but he also like touches to a lot of little instruments, and amongst others he plays a little bit of Melodeon. Like he had this little Hohner 2 rows 8 buttons, and that I would just play 3 or 4 tunes on it. That's actually my first introduction with the instrument. When I was a small kid, like he would sometimes take the accordion and play, and the only tunes he would know were like quite energetic tunes, like very funny polkas to me, at least by then. And it gave quite a special time, a special identity to these moments. Like, oh, he's taking the accordions, here are the funny tunes that are coming on, and yeah, really like that.
Would he play for your entertainment and then you would get involved later on, picking it up, pressing buttons, and like any kid does?
Definitely. Maybe I tried like to just make a sound or just pushing buttons, as you said, but I was a really small kid and I didn't start, so it was more an entertainment. I would sometimes go to see him in concerts, but not even so much. My parents were by then they were involved in a traditional music like association. That's actually where they met. And so I would also be brought to evenings like with events like shows or balls, but I would be like, this small kid with all the other ones running around through the chairs and crumbling everywhere between legs of everyone, not really paying much attention to what happens, but still like printed somewhere in the back of my mind. Then my dad and my mom got divorced when I was 5. I got to see a bit less my dad for a few years, but also I got a bit outside of this traditional music world, and it had to wait till I reached my 15. I think first of a few years before that, I got much more close with my dad, so I got more interested in what he was doing and got to reconnect with all this music. So when I was 15, I remember entering French high school, that I started to get interested in music. It was like an active mental process of like, okay, buying my first CDs, wanting to understand things about music, to listen to different things. It could be either like the mainstream radio music, but also like my dad would give me some CDs from folk bands or like some very strange and weird music I had never heard about. I would ask my best friend's dad that was fond of classical music to have me introduced into the classical music world, because my family had no step into that. So I would like borrow every week a new CD and bring it back to home. I think everything accelerated for me when I entered university. I started by the end of my first university year, I started with dancing actually.
I remember you saying in France when we were together on the stage, which if you haven't seen the vlog, guys, go and check that out because it will explain so much about how we got to know each other. And you were saying how, it wasn't really your thing. You were kind of dragged along as a kid. Then you found dance again much later in life when you went to university.
Yeah, well, actually it's like a lot of person, it started for girls reasons like my it's funny story, but because sometimes it's always this thing where little small steps you take someday, you have no idea how it's going to change your life forever. Okay, my dad was in a relationship with my stepbrother's mom. She's a teacher in conservatoire. During these years of university I was living at my dad's, and someday I'm home alone, and Claire, she calls on the phone and calls me. She says, "Oh, Luca, I need help. I was supposed to be here, and I have all of my all the students that are coming in to take apéro. I was supposed to be here, but I'm late. So can you welcome them and start to drink something with them?" So I'm like, "Okay, can do that." And just okay, door rings. I go open the door, and 3 very charming ladies that were just above my age walk in, and it happens that they are a lot into Balfolk. So they're like, "Oh, but you're the son of Robert, and you don't come to dancing." Like, well, no, not really. My friends were not interested into that. And they're like, "Oh, we have to take you there." So they finally they pushed that later on, and I accepted. I accepted once because I said, okay, they really seem to want me to come and dance, so what's the wrong with it? I joined for a first bal, a bal where a young accordionist named Aurélien Clarambeau was just starting to play in his very first band. I remember that, which is also another fun story. And immediately I felt for the dancing, not just for the girls, but for the dancing. After 1 year, I was really craving the Melodeon, always watching, always listening, really curious about that. I had even considered starting music earlier in my life, in high school, but I was too shy. I had problems with shyness, could not play in front of anyone, and could just practice home with no one able to listen to. So at some point I had quit and said, okay, music not for you. After my second year of university, finally the desire was overpowering the shyness, and I finally kicked my own mental butt and started accordion with the exact same box my dad was playing when I was a kid. That was still in the cupboard. So I went there, took it, went on the internet, searched a little method, brought it back in my chamber, and started.
That's really lovely to know that it was just sat waiting for you, almost like, oh, you'll be back. It's almost like it knew. It's like, oh, I'll wait for you. I'll stay in this cupboard getting dusty. My journey into the Melodeon actually had a similar thing of me squirreling myself away in my student halls, pissing everybody off that listened, down the corridor. But I didn't really do much coursework because I was just playing Melodeon. But I suppose I'm a Melodeon player with a degree, but it's nothing to do with Melodeon. It's kind of, I know a lot of Melodeon players who have ended up in traditional folk music, but they have a science degree, which, what was your first degree? What did you study?
Yeah, I have a, is it bachelor, the one that's 3 years of university?
Yeah, the undergraduate bachelors.
Undergraduate bachelors, yeah. I have that in paleontology.
So there we go, guys. He can dig up dinosaurs and play for Balfolk. And make dinosaurs dance, I guess. Not to be rude to anybody, but
we could try that. But maybe it has to do with some old things like traditional music, dinosaurs. It's one of my 2 connections with the Friends characters. Everyone keeps me reminding about that. One of these characters is a paleontologist, and I have also a second link to that, is that I have an actual diagnosed third nipple, like another character of the Friends series. For some reasons I seem tied to these characters, but they don't play Melodeon.
Have you ever tried to carry a sofa up the stairs and scream pivot as well?
No, not yet.
Okay. Only goes so far. We've talked about your dad, and we should mention that he played in Chatterbox, who are a very famous band that people know about over here, but I don't feel that they are anywhere near as famous as they are on the continent in France. Just tell us a little bit about that and what it was like growing up with a famous dad.
Well, for me, the history of my dad with Balfolk, for years, like it used to be something very local in Poitou, the region I come from. But when I started, at this exact time, when I started to get interested in music, way before starting to dance and playing, my dad got a duo with an accordionist, a French accordionist you might know, called Benoît Gervigny. And they toured a lot during 5 years. By then, it was one of the two bands of Poitou going outside of Poitou, like Chatterbox was not even existing. Chatterbox set up in 2010 for the most of it, and my dad just joined them 2011. It's quite safe to say that quite quickly for the following 6 years at least, they would be like one of the major band in French Balfolk. My dad was first known for this collaboration with Benoît Gervigny. So I started, 1 year I started to dance, next year I started to play music. The year after, during summer, I decided to start my very first festival and decided to go to Gentine. So that was 2005. My dad was supposed to play there with Benoît. So we planned that, he will bring me to Gentine, we'll set up the tents and like have fun and everything. But for some internal reasons, my dad finally brutally decided to stop the duo like 10 days before this Gentine. He went to me and said, here's my car, here's the keys, go to Gentine without me, have fun. Well, I don't know anybody. We started a duo with my dad practically between 05 and 09, 010. My dad was nowhere to be seen in the Balfolk. He completely quit. And these are the years where I was just everywhere, in every possible festival, dancing all the summer, every kind of holidays I could have. And also the years in which I started to set up my first bands and started to play myself. When I stepped in this world, first I was the son of Robert, former Benoît's partner. He used to joke about that when we set up the duo and he arrived in festivals again. People were starting to say, oh, so you're the dad of Lucas. He was like, when I left, you were the son of Robert. When I'm back, I'm the dad of Lucas. It's fantastic to share this duo with my dad, but it's a special thing to share this kind of things in a professional context. It has all the good points and all the bad points. The fact that he was in Chatterbox allowed us to be very often in the same balls and festivals, but not in the same band, so being able to just share fun moments, drinking with friends and everything. Chatterbox was so thrilling for everyone that when we would play and perform as a duo, people would come backstage and ask my dad, when are you available with Chatterbox to come and play? Of course, the other way around would not arrive. It was not happening. Not so bad, because I had also plenty of work alongside, so...
We should talk about that. You play in a lot of bands. I'm desperate to get Petit Piment over here. We need to drive up a bit of encouragement, I think, to get some bookings for a gig. But yeah, talk a little bit about who you play with, how those bands came about.
So I started Accordion in 2004, and I think in 2005 I figured out I would love to make that my job, my professional thing. And even if back then I was having a pretty decent level for someone who had played 1 year, I just had a pretty decent level for someone that had just been playing 1 year. And I was nowhere close to be able to make a living out of it. I had no bands. I was still in a lot of learnings. I decided to focus on accordion and working my instrument. So I graduated in paleontology, then I registered in musicology, and I decided to spend as much time I could home just working my box. I also understood that expecting to have a certain level to start doing things, it would take too long. So I would consider two things. First is where I work home, and second thing is let's say yes to every kind of possible experience. Let's learn on my way. a bit before COVID, I just made the math and realized that I was at a rate that was more than one new band a year for 15 years. Some of them lasted, some of them didn't, some of them were like brand new creations, some of them were I would like replace people, and it got me the chance to learn with a lot of different people in this kind of music, but on different repertoires. Amazing musicians that were like far better than I was, but also like a very good source of listening and learning. And it could be either some things like very modern, like with a lot of composition, arrangement, harmonies. Some things were more driven toward classical influences, sometimes jazz influences, but also a lot were like very traditionals. Like I had the chance to play with some skilled like Breton musicians, Southwest musicians, Limousin, Auvergne, Poitou, of course, some Italian musicians. The bad side, on the other hand, was that starting new project every year made me also not always able to give as much involvement as could have been on some bands, because I had constantly between 7 and 10 bands at the same time.
That's a lot of repertoire and diarification, as I call it. It's like trying to get your life together to do that. That's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was exciting. And of course, I say 10, but like on these 10, 5 of them were maybe playing twice or 3 times a year. It took me some time to understand that, oh, maybe some bands didn't get that successful because I could have been more investing into them. Because in French Balfolk you have this, which is quite a blessing, but sometimes turns you lazy, is that it's a very, very small world. Every organizer knows every musicians and vice versa. The thing is, if you play at least well and your projects are not too bad, people will know that and they will come to you. Unless when you're very, very beginning, but you're never in a necessity of prospection. Like you don't have to advertise too much to look for gigs and everything, because all along the year you get called and written to by organizers, say, oh yeah, I've seen your band, could you come? And oh, I want to, which sometimes puts you in a quite lazy positions of, oh, I would just make a new band, do a bit of advertising, some like key spots to play for everyone to know, and I would just wait. And while I wait, instead of trying to get a bit more advertisement, video clips, CDs and prospection, I would start a new band or get invited to join a new band, which would like put a lot of bands that were just like, okay, no, let's wait for the cash back. I was also quite young, so it's not regret in the sense that, oh, I should have done differently and better. And it also was like more egoistic thought. It was just the perfect school for me. Like I could learn so many amazing things and had so many amazing experience. But then I think shortly before COVID, maybe 2 or 3 years before BC, as we say, before COVID, I had the choice at some point that, okay, I want to reduce this number of bands and be able to focus more. So I started on the idea that, okay, I should have maybe main bands and sides. The sides would be the one that just play 2 or 3 times a year, but the main would be like, I want a solo, I want a duo, I want a trio, and I want a quartet. Then it's gonna evolve a bit, but I want to reduce the mains to be able to focus more on that.
But then COVID hit and everything went to pot anyway. So I think, if I'm right in my research, Petit Piment launched the album at the end of 2019 and probably had a nice lineup for the summer festivals. And then did you just have to pick up again in the last couple of years?
Well, that's not true. Well, no, you were talking about the CD, were you?
Yeah, I think I saw a date of 2019 and I saw some posts like announcing the new lineup.
Well, so Petit Piment up today is the last of my bands. Petit Piment is started to be thought about in 2017. So I'm right in this moment where I want to have a main solo, duo, trio. So solo is okay. Trio, I still had and still have Ballsy Swing. Duo, I was right in the setup of Turbo Ball, which still also exists. But quartet I didn't have. I wanted to be able to fulfill one of my dreams. I've been a lot into listening to and also dancing a bit of Caribbean music when I was younger, and I've always been a big fan of polyrhythmic music, like music from islands, music from South America, from Africa. I've spent maybe 10 years saying like this to the wind, oh, when I grow up I want to set up a band that make you shake your booty. But I wanted to have this crossroad between Balfolk dances and some more like booty music.
Well, as a member of your audience this summer, I can definitely say that you've hit the crossroads quite nicely there.
Yeah.
Because Le Son Continu, that was bopping. You know, that floor, I'm surprised it was still in one piece afterwards, because some of those pieces were incredible. I think you're right, the cross rhythm really worked well with a lot of those Poitou dances, which already seem to be cross-rhythmic in themselves, so the fact that you've got those extra layers with the two drum kits.
Leo and Florian, what is great is like you have all like these Latin jazz bands or rock bands or where you have the drum battery and the percussions kit. That's opening a lot of possibilities. That's where I started to consider it, and went to the three guys and suggested like we could set up the band on that. But not necessarily that the tunes have to be traditional, but the groove has to be more in tune with traditional dances, and then you have all the decorum of this rhythm around. But we always want to make sure that still the melody drives the groove for the dancing.
Petit Piment, you can listen to their album Chill on Bandcamp, and there's some videos on my YouTube channel and various others as well. I'll leave links to that in the description on this podcast, both on the YouTube and the audio version, so do check that out. Luca's website is also down there as well, which you can find various clips of him on SoundCloud. You joined me last night on Patreon to lead a Melinar that I invited you to lead, because you taught me in the summer. We were doing an advanced harmony week and accompaniment rhythms and that kind of thing, and I got to take my year-old Handry 18 with me. It's a whole other world. As you can see if you're watching the video version of this, I play 2-row 8 bass. That's the world I've come from over the last 17 years, and now all of a sudden I'm playing 3-row 18 bass. Obviously, with extra sounds comes extra thinking process, extra understanding of what I now have and why it's useful. Last night's Melinar was all about your harmony tree and the way that you've contextualised or, processed the understanding of building chords and understanding harmony. It went down so well with my Patreon crew, which I think it definitely blew some brains. They said in comments that they were amazing. Thank you so much. There's things in there I've never understood and now I do, but there's so much to digest, and it was only an hour that you had to kind of blast them with it. One of the things that I find interesting as a teacher, I come from an English music background, English folk music. Music theory doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with the background of music that I come from, but as I teach, I've learnt more about it. I did classical flute, I did grades systems at school, so I learnt up to a point. Flute doesn't teach you chord theory, so that's been totally new on the accordion. I'm just really interested to hear your take on how important you think music theory is in folk music, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about what you went on to study after paleontology and how that has kind of transformed your thinking about music and your contemporary compositions and that kind of thing, and how studying music really can, add or detract from what we're trying to achieve. What do you think?
If I had to give a short answer to how music theory is important to traditional music, especially in box playing, my answer would be it is not.
How interesting. I was thinking, I think I know what he's going to say, and that's not what I thought you were going to say.
Well, it's not important. I say that because it is not necessary. The background of this music doesn't come from theoretical music, and it has been excellent without it, and it has rich core points without it. But it's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of interesting things. In France, I'd say that the vast majority of traditional music players don't know a single thing or barely a single thing about music theory. Some don't even know which note they're pushing and putting. And that doesn't prevent them from being excellent in their skills. It just depends on what you're interested in.
I think that's really interesting. The parallels are the same as what I experience here in England, but that was not my assumption from France and the rest of the wider continent, because we've got it in our heads here, and I say we loosely, it's me and my geeky friends who like do advanced accordion weeks, so we're like really into it and we want to learn that stuff. Not everyone is like that. My assumption was that there was more of that attitude in France, Italy, Belgium, because there are conservatoires, there are academies that you can study at, and that's where you learn that stuff.
No, that's not. Well, I mean, there is, but that's not where you learn that in the context of traditional music. I went also to conservatoire for a traditional music degree, and there I learned a lot of very, very important and nice things, but not so much about music theory. The only music theory that's quite linked to this world would be the modes, because in traditional music we have been seeing different modes, like from all elderly people playing them. But the thing is, we are playing this music now not in a traditional context. In France, like most of traditional music we can see right now is being used for bals events, which is a very modern creation. It's more of a hobby, like you learn your music to make people dance, and people come to the bal on the Saturday evening because they want to have their fancy dress and have some dancing. The core thing is you want to make people dance and make your music good for that. That doesn't rely on music theory and on harmony. That relies on basically the way you play your melodies. The melodies is the center of how good it's going to be for the dancers. That's a given for me. In my view, that's a given. But then we all grew up in a world with many, many music influences. We all got to listen to pop music, jazz music, classical music. Everything got mixed up all together. And harmony, this is a language that has been in our ears ever since we were born. It's part of our brain construction. The way brain works is fascinating. We have this theory with other friends, some of my Canadian fiddler friends. She said, okay, you can train your ear in many directions, but she thinks that when you start your music life, there are two ears. Like there is the horizontal ear and the vertical ear. Vertical ear is the one that focuses on the summing up of sounds and the whole piling. So it's about space, colors, impressions. It's all about like the superposition of sound. There is also a horizontal ear, which is more about one line of melody, following the discourse of the melody, going all around. Traditional music for dancing relies a lot on the horizontal ear. If her theory would be true, then I think I started music with a big vertical ear, more developed than the horizontal one. And it's even quite funny for me. It's still the case today, and it used to be the case 20 years ago when I started music. When I arrive in a jam session and I can hear people playing a tune, if you ask me after 1 minute, okay, what are the chords? Even though I was drinking and chatting, I think if you lend me my box, I just need 15 seconds to figure out what the chords were. After the same time, you ask me, what was the melody like? And I would be like, oh, that was... I will have the most, like when it goes up, when it goes down, and on that whole, the exact endings are and everything. I used to be very surprised with some of my friends are no performer, they don't play music, but they listen to a lot of music, and they could be the ones that could sing perfectly a melody played by a band on stage after a ball, saying, oh, do you remember this waltz that was doing that? And for me, it was like a very blurry memory of the exact lines. And they were like, no, you're mistaken. And they would sing the whole thing. And I'm like, So maybe for some people, like this melody thing is a real thing. The thing for me is I got very quickly captivated by chords. After 1 year of accordion, I had the chance to make 10 days workshop with Emmanuel Parisel when we were all building up our own accordions.
People know Emmanuel very well here. He's much loved in England.
He's a fantastic person. He did used to give some accompaniment workshops when he would be giving accordion workshops, because that's what he does the best. One day we were like having the lunch breakfast and said, oh, by the way, guys, I brought up my workshop paper book, introduction with all the positions, with some exercises, with grids, with like rhythm exercise. Of course, I knew what a chord was, but I had not yet started to look at them on my box and everything, so it was like immediate for me. Back home I could already spend hours just like lying in my bed with my box, just playing chords, changing one finger, finding out what sound it makes, chaining different chords together. I did not know anything about rules of harmony or whatever. How good it made me feel to just listen to these big sounds together and how they combine one to the other one.
One of the interesting things that came out of the stage in the summer for me, we were sat there like, God, this guy's got this brain the size of a planet, and he can retain and he knows all of this stuff and he uses it in his music. The interpretation, for me at least, was, so he knows this theory and he uses that to apply to his music. But actually at the end of the week, when we talked about how do you use this, you said in my interpretation that you start with just messing around with sound, like you just described, lying on your bed playing just random sounds and linking them together. And it's only since you've trained yourself to understand the theory and gone to conservatoire and learnt how to do that you've retroactively gone back and see, oh, that's that chord, that's what I'm doing there, and that's what I'm doing here. I know that there are people out there that sit and work out the theory and create things from that. That's absolutely a methodology. But the one that certainly interests me a lot more, because it's where I've grown into and where I come from, is to hear things in your head and just make them happen, or find them by happy accident, and then if you want to, if it interests you to do so, retroactively work out what you're doing and why it sounds good. Then you have the rules to apply in different places, I guess.
It is very interesting, this point, because if you want to use some theory at some point, okay, the intention is that eventually it will be linked up with the practice. As you said, it's a complex question for me, because it's also linked to the way you teach, being yourself or someone else. And you are a way more trained teacher than I am, so you might recall what I'm going to say.
I'm not trained to be a teacher, by the way. I just do it because I taught myself.
No, trained because you trained yourself, but you... Yeah. But maybe you will relate to what I'm going to say, is that, okay, there's this thing as... Okay, I come from this science background, so for me, when I started either to teach myself or teach other people, it would make sense to consider things steps by steps. What matters the most, what the logical progression. So, okay, you take water, you take some flour, and it gives you a paste. Okay, you have a paste, then you have a paste, you will put some... Why the hell have I started to get into this kind
Food
of metaphor?
coloring?
I know nothing about kitchening. Okay, anyway, no, my actual metaphor is always the house. It's like, how could you possibly learn to build a house? First, you have to learn how to build a wall. But how do you learn to build a wall? Oh, you have to learn how to build a brick. But how do you learn to build a brick? You have to learn to make cement, which in a logical progression makes sense. If your goal is to build a house, if you spend 10 hours by taking some sand and dirt and learning how to melt sand and dirt, you get bored easily. That's always the balance between some practice and some theory. And the theory in that is very tricky, because also for chords, if you just get into harmony, theory, and it's like, okay, well, you've understood that, now that you're understood, try it. Okay, you try your thing, that's that. Okay, new concept, no, learn that, try it. Yes, okay. That's a hard way to put it in your mind, and you'd better be very, very motivated on the first hand. The first intention you have when you take your instrument and you want to learn things is to make music, is not to learn conceptual words in your mind. So you have to always to link that to music, I think. I figured out that process I just described could work for me sometimes, because I have all this scientific background and I'm very geeky when it comes to that. But it also works a lot, and for me it worked also better when I was like, oh, that chord progression I hear in all these tunes I love, oh, that's the one I make here. I just recognize it when I hear it, but I don't know what it is, so I can't identify it, label it, and be able to summon it from my brain. I just know when it's here. I'm like, oh, that's this amazing chord, but where is it? That's where the theory comes in handy for me. It's like, it's a way to organize your thoughts. It's like, oh, this thing, okay, let's take a moment. So you like, in this example, there is this chord, and this chord. How are they? Which positions? Which key are we talking about? Let's compare to the other one. If we transpose, oh, that's the same. So let's now find a way to describe that on a more organized way. So that's where theory arrives and says that's X, that becomes Y, that's what becomes Z, and there is in this position and there is this extension here and that. And if it gives you this feeling, it's because see, these notes here is related to the next one and this like and that, and that's why. And you're like,
It connects the dots, doesn't it, in the mind map of sounds.
Exactly.
I love the way that you explain things about your own experience. I think that's what makes you a really good teacher, is you're able to actually understand what it is you do and how you understand it. And I think that's just a general thing about teaching, right? If you can kind of break things down. But theory, if we start to become interested in it, it helps us to teach ourselves the understanding of how there's the interrelationships between sounds.
I have to admit that even though I'm still working hard on that, I have my limits when it comes to teaching, and I have a very strong weak point. Is if I'm talking about the house metaphor, I'm very enthusiastic about finding ideas to explain and make that I explain to people that are already in a process of learning how to build a house. They know what a house is, they know which kind of house they want, and they just struggle to figure out some steps. Sometimes I can be a terrible teacher when it comes to someone that just knocks the door and say, oh, I heard it's about learning to build houses. I don't even really know what a house is. Can you drive me through everything? And I'm like, I will try my best. But I always end up being the one explaining all the variation on the different grains in bricks and the different layers of red, where these people are still not understood what's the difference between a bathroom and a living room. And I'm like, sorry.
I've gone too much too soon. Well, that's when I might as well just say it and plug my own online course, Pick Up and Play, which is for absolute beginners. As I've learnt more, I've got more confident teaching the higher levels. It's always one of those things, learning is a lifelong thing, and it's so exciting to do that. People on Patreon have asked that it would be really interesting for them to know what the breakthrough moments in your own learning journey were, and if there were any particular tunes or exercises that really helped you or that you'd recommend.
I mostly remember choking points where some tunes gave me the hell of a hard time to manage to play them. Even though I must admit that Valère's tunes in Ballsy Swing sometimes still gives me some decent nightmares to play, but
Future Mel here, just stepping in to say that there was a section edited out of this free public podcast. It is available as an extended edition on my Patreon, where Luca talks in much more detail for about 10 minutes on his breakthrough moments and exercises and things that he's discovered along the way. It's definitely worth signing up for, so I thought I'd just let you know that you can get that juicy information over on my Patreon. The link's in the description. And now back to the interview. I think there's so much in there. It doesn't all come at once. Like, you can't expect these extra layers, these decorations on the house, the new roof tiles, whatever it might be. Those are all things that aren't essential in the beginning, but it's as you build the layers up and you have a firm foundation, as I always say, because I use housing, building analogies. I think it's a nice one. Or cake baking. You can't decorate the cake until you've baked it. I think that's really important for people to keep grafting, basically. Don't give up. Keep striving to get everything you want. Keep looking for new inspiration, listening to new bands. That's really important.
And there's just one journey. It's yours. It reminds me of this cliche sentence that you have in movies sometimes. It's all about the journey. It's not about the destination. I mean, in art, I think it's more than ever true, because there is no reachable destination. Every time you reach a place, you will immediately start to look to the next one. And if you keep thinking about destination, you'll be frustrated all your life, because you'll never be there. You'll always be in the process of reaching something. It's like maybe the key factor in learning music, I'd say, is try to cultivate this wheel of destination a bit, because that's what drives you on. But find your own way to enjoy the ride and enjoy the journey. You want to get there. But if you're just so far you're here, look at the landscape here. It's lovely. Like, they even put some zebras in the waterfall and some ice clouds and everything. You should always think, hey, this is what I know. This is what I managed to do. Someday I want to do maybe better, maybe more, but I want to do differently. But look at all you've achieved yet and what has happened since. And just be gentle to yourself, be gentle to yourself and to what you managed to do, and just use that to go ahead, but like enjoy. Like you just have one life long to live, and if you spend like the 3/4 of it just waiting for the moment you'll be that perfect musicians, that's 3/4 of your life a bit sadder than what it could be.
I think that's a beautiful place to wrap up this wonderful interview. I mean, I feel like I could carry on talking to you for hours. You very graciously provided that Melinar for us on advanced harmony theory, so thank you so much. If you're not familiar with my Patreon, you can go and subscribe. The links will be in the description, and you can find Luca's episode. Thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you very much, Mel, because that's a fantastic work you're achieving with your channel and your lessons and your community. So I'm very, very impressed by that. And thank you very much for making this happen.
Thank you. I honestly, from that conversation that we had in the woods in Corrèze somewhere, where we were on a group walk to get away from the music for a bit because we were all fried, you were a taskmaster that week. Some of those listening exercises were crazy, but anyway, incredible that you said yes and that you kind of gave it a go, because it's not your normal environment to be on mute with a group of 20 people or whatever. So
no, but it was a fun experience.
Thank you for being the first, hopefully many guys. This is the first episode of my guest tutor series, both on Patreon and on podcast, so do check it out. Go and find Luca online, buy his albums. Hopefully we'll see him in the UK before too long. Who knows? I don't know. We can't say anything at the moment, but there might be something. Awesome stuff. Thank you so much, Luca.
Thank you, Mel.
And there we have it, a wonderful interview with Luca. As I was editing back through that, I learnt so much just through revisiting in a different headspace, and I was really able to hear everything he said. Just on a purely selfish level, I have learnt so much from this interview, and I am so grateful to Luca for giving up his time and sharing all of these wonderful wisdoms that he has created and discovered in his own journey through music and life. Thank you so much, Luca. If you have enjoyed this episode, you might be interested in the extended edition, which is exclusive to my Patreon subscribers, so go and check out that link in the description, where Luca is sharing more about his breakthrough moments in his own learning journey. Really useful to know. Please give it a like, give it a subscribe on whatever platform you're on. It's all going to really help to grow this podcast. Share it to people who you think are going to be interested in the content, and let them know that there will be a new episode every month. This month over on my Patreon, I'm ecstatic to be able to announce that the wonderful Hartwin Dorr is going to be my guest. He's also going to be sitting down with me to do a podcast interview, which will be out in February. If you don't want to miss the live Melinar tutorial with Hartwin, he's going to be going over his approach to writing your very first tune. If you're interested in getting to grips with composition and tune writing, you really don't want to miss out on that. You can be part of the live Zoom Melinar with Hartwin later this month on my Patreon. Check out the link in the description to go and sign up to that. If you can't make the live, you will be able to catch up with the recording in your own time. Really exciting for next month, and there's loads more coming beyond that as well. So stay tuned and subscribe, like, comment, do all the wonderful things to help boost this brand new podcast. And I look forward to seeing you again next month. Cheers, guys. Bye.